Welcome to Dark History for Sleep. Tonight we walk the cobblestones of Victorian London, not the polished boulevards of the wealthy, but the narrow, damp streets where the city forgets its own people. It is 1888, Whitechapel in the East End, the year the papers will remember for a name, and the streets will remember for fear. Here, gas lamps sputter in the fog, their light swallowed by the cold mist rolling off the Thames. The air is thick with coal smoke, and the scent of horse manure mixes with something sharper. The sour tang of unwashed bodies, and the stale rot of yesterday's refuse. Every step crunches on broken glass, old oyster shells, and the damp grit of a city that never truly dries. Around you, the lodging houses are bursting, 3, sometimes 4 to a bed. If you have a bed at all. If you don't, you pay a penny to lean over a rope in a doss house, sleeping half-standing among strangers who smell of gin and sickness. This is the London the tourists never see, and for the women who live here, the choices are almost gone before they're made. Factory work pays pennies, if you can find it. Laundry work leaves your hands raw and your back broken. And in a world that turns its face from the poor, the street offers the only wage that keeps the cold from your bones. But that wage comes with a price, one that is paid in illness, shame, and danger, waiting in the shadows. Whitechapel after dark is a maze. Narrow alleys twist between leaning brick walls, their bricks slick with damp and soot. The fog moves like a living thing, curling around doorways and swallowing sound. You learn to listen differently here, for the shuffle of footsteps behind you, for the low whistle of a man signaling to another, for the creak of a lodging house door that shouldn't be opening. Most women work in pairs when they can. It's safer to share the watch, to catch the look in a man's eyes before he steps too close. But safety is never guaranteed. A quiet street might promise privacy, or conceal someone waiting for a moment when no one is looking. The men who come here are not all the same. Some are lonely, some are drunk, some are violent before a word is even spoken. And the cruelest kind are the ones who smile and wait until you think the night might pass without trouble, before showing you why you should have stayed in the light. In 1888, whispers of missing women are already moving through the streets. No names yet, just rumors. Someone didn't come back to her lodging. Someone's bed has been empty 2 nights in a row. The police show little urgency. After all, these are women of the street. And in Victorian London, that means the city has already decided what your life is worth. The East End's lodging houses are not homes. They are stopping points. A place to collapse until the street calls you out again. Inside, the air is thick with heat from too many bodies and the sharp sting of cheap gin. The walls sweat moisture, and every surface smells faintly of damp cloth and smoke. Beds are narrow, lumpy, and shared between strangers. If you can't afford a bed, there's the rope line. A coarse rope, strung from wall to wall, where the desperate sleep bent forward, arms dangling, heads bowed. It is not rest, but it is shelter. Mortal privacy is impossible. Your business is everyone's business. Conversations are overheard, fights break out over coins or spilled drink, and the sound of coughing never stops. Disease moves quickly here. Tuberculosis, cholera, influenza. They pass from bed to bed, mouth to mouth, until the coughing fades into silence. The women who live here do not pretend it's safe, but they know the streets are colder, the night is longer, and a woman without a place to go will do what she must to buy even a few hours of warmth. Whitechapel has no written laws for women like you, but there are rules all the same. Rules learned quickly, because breaking them can mean a beating, or worse. Rule 1. Stay where there's light. Gas lamps may flicker, but their glow is the only warning you'll get before a stranger's face appears from the fog. Rule 2. Never follow a man too far from the crowd. Side streets are quiet, but in Whitechapel, quiet means no one to hear you scream. Rule 3. Remember faces. A man who was gentle last week may be violent tonight. Drink changes people, so does desperation. Rule 4. Hide your earnings well. Pickpockets are everywhere, and some will follow you home for a single shilling. And finally, the rule no one says out loud, but everyone knows. If another woman disappears, keep walking. As cruel as it sounds, in the East End, stopping to ask questions can make you the next to vanish. The streets are not a place to dream. They are a place to survive. And survival here is counted one night at a time. By the summer of 1888, the air in Whitechapel feels heavier. It's not just the coal smoke or the damp. It's the tension, an unspoken dread curling through the streets. Women have gone missing before. It's the East End. People disappear into poverty every day, but now the disappearances are different. The women aren't running away. They're being found. A body in a dark yard, another in a narrow alley, no money in their pockets, no life left in their eyes. The police speak in vague terms, and the newspapers twist the details into sensation. Each story sells more papers than the last, and with each headline, the fear grows sharper. Among the women, the talk is quieter, names whispered, warnings traded. Some women choose to stay inside, even if it means going hungry. Others take their chances, because hunger is just another slow death. The city carries on above you. The markets, the carriages, the opera houses. While in the East End, the night feels like a noose tightening. And still, the gas lamps burn, and the fog rolls in. September 1888. The newspapers give the killer a name, Jack the Ripper. It's a name meant to sell headlines, and it works. Within days, every street hawker in London is shouting it, their voices cutting through the fog like a knife. The letters start appearing. Some are obvious hoaxes, scribbled threats meant to frighten. Others feel too close to the truth. The handwriting shakes. The tone shifts between mockery and rage, and each one fuels the fire. For the women of Whitechapel, the name changes everything. Before, there were whispers. Now there's a face in every shadow. Whether it's real or not, men who linger too long earn sharp looks. A stranger's step too quick behind you is enough to make your heart pound. And yet the streets don't empty. They can't. You can't afford fear when rent is due, when the lodging house demands its coin, when a night inside might mean a night without food. So you keep walking, you keep working, and you hope the name in the papers belongs to someone else's nightmare. The evening starts early in Whitechapel. By dusk, women are already in the streets, leaning in doorways, walking slow under the flicker of the gas lamps. The rain has been on and off all day. The cobblestones shine black, reflecting the lamps like tiny pools of fire. A woman's work here isn't all in the shadows. Sometimes it's in the open, at the edge of a market, outside a tavern, where men spill into the street, laughing too loud and smelling of beer and smoke. The talk is quick. A nod, a price, a turn down a quieter lane. But every step away from the crowd is a step deeper into risk. Some nights, the work passes without trouble. A coin changes hands. The woman returns to the street. The night goes on. Other nights, there's a sudden change in tone, a grip that tightens too much, a look in the eyes that says this man wants more than he paid for. The skill isn't just in the work. It's in reading people, in knowing when to smile, when to step back, and when to run. And in Whitechapel, you learn quickly that running isn't always enough. The tavern is a refuge and a trap. From the outside, it's just another soot-blackened building, its sign swinging in the damp wind. But inside, the heat and the noise hit you like a wave. The air is thick with pipe smoke and the sour tang of spilled ale. Boots scrape the floorboards. Men shout over each other, voices slurred from drink. In the far corner, a fiddler plays a tune too fast for the room, his bow scraping like the sound of an old hinge. For a woman working the streets, a tavern means more than just warmth. It's a place to watch for opportunity. A man too drunk to count his coins, or one who seems lonely enough to pay for company. But it's also a place where tempers flare. Arguments turn to shoving, shoving turns to fists, and fists, here, are rarely the end of it. The barkeep knows your face. He might let you stay, or he might throw you out if you make trouble. Reputation matters, so does keeping your head down. Because in a tavern like this, one wrong word, and you could find yourself in the street again. Only this time, with someone following you. Leaving the tavern, the warmth falls away almost instantly. The cold air clings to your skin, and the fog feels thicker than before. The streets are quieter now. The shop shutters are closed, their iron bolts catching the faint glow of the gas lamps. The only sounds are your footsteps and the distant clip of a horse's hooves somewhere deeper in the city. You keep to the routes you know, the streets where the lamps still work, where other women might be within shouting distance. Every few minutes you glance over your shoulder. In Whitechapel, paranoia isn't a burden, it's protection. Sometimes you see him, the man who's been leaning at the corner for the last 3 nights. Not a client, not a policeman, just a shape in the fog who never seems to walk away until you do. The last stretch to the lodging house is the worst. It's quiet there, too far from the taverns, too close to the alleys where the lamps are broken. And as you pass one narrow cut between buildings, you think you hear a step behind you. You don't stop to look. Not here, not tonight. Bad luck doesn't announce itself in Whitechapel. It comes quietly, in the form of a wrong turn, a broken lamp, or a stranger's voice cutting through the fog. Tonight it's the voice, low, almost polite, asking if you've got the time. You glance toward it, and a man steps forward from the shadows, his hat pulled low, coat collar turned up. Nothing unusual, except that you didn't hear his steps before he spoke. Your instinct is to keep moving, but the street ahead is empty, and his shape fills the space behind you. In this part of the East End, there's nowhere to run that isn't another dark alley. You turn down a better lit street, half expecting him to vanish back into the fog. But he doesn't. He follows, slow enough not to seem in a hurry, close enough to keep you in reach. By the time you reach the lodging house, your hands are cold despite your gloves. You push through the door without looking back, pretending not to hear the slow retreat of footsteps fading into the night. Tonight it's only bad luck. Tomorrow it could be worse. Fear changes how you walk in Whitechapel. It changes the way you breathe. You start avoiding corners where you can't see around. You cross the street at the sight of a shadow too still. The streets begin to feel alive, as though the bricks and fog themselves are watching. It's not superstition, it's survival. Even the regulars, the clients you've seen for months, become unpredictable. They ask more questions. They want to meet in quieter places, and you can't tell if it's caution or something darker. Some women carry small blades. Others rely on their fists. A few keep a friend close by, ready to step in if trouble starts. But the truth is, if a man is determined, there's little you can do. The streets are his as much as they are yours. The Ripper killings have made the police more visible, but not more helpful. They question you, follow you, and sometimes run you off the streets entirely. Protection in Whitechapel is just another form of control. By October, the fear in Whitechapel is no longer a quiet thing. It's loud. In the hurried steps of women leaving work early, in the slamming of doors, in the way people speak the killer's name only in half whispers. The murders have grown bolder. Bodies found closer to main streets, under the flicker of gas lamps where the killer should be seen, but never is. The newspapers seize on every detail, real or imagined. Descriptions of a man in a dark coat, a foreigner with strange eyes, a butcher with blood on his apron. No two accounts match, but every one of them makes the streets feel smaller. Women start to vanish from familiar routes. Streets once crowded with voices are nearly empty by midnight. Even the taverns close earlier, their owners unwilling to risk trouble spilling inside. And yet work must go on. Hunger doesn't care about fear. The lodging houses still want their rent. The cold still creeps through the cracks in the walls. So night after night, you step into the fog. Not because you're brave, but because there's no other choice. Every woman in Whitechapel knows the streets to avoid. They're not marked on any map, but the knowledge passes quietly, from one voice to another, like a warning against poison. Dutfield's Yard, Hanbury Street, Miller's Court, names that, in another part of London, would mean nothing. Here, they taste bitter in the mouth. These are the narrow lanes where light barely reaches the ground, where buildings lean so close together the sky is just a thin slice of darkness above you. A man could follow you here and vanish without a trace. Some women still work these streets because they have no choice. They're quieter, less patrolled, and a client willing to follow you there might be more generous with his coin. But generosity can be a mask. And in the autumn of 1888, too many women who turned into these alleys never stepped back out. When the Ripper killed here, the walls seemed to close in. The cobblestones seemed to hold the sound of it. And long after the bodies were carried away, no one could walk these streets without feeling watched. By late October, Whitechapel is more than afraid. It's turning on itself. Whispers become accusations. Neighbors begin to eye one another with suspicion. A man who keeps odd hours, a butcher with blood on his hands from honest work, a foreign accent, all enough to draw hostile stares. The police, under pressure to act, question everyone they can. For the women, this means being pulled off the streets, forced to give names, and asked about clients they'll never see again. Every answer feels like an invitation for trouble. Say too much, and you risk retaliation. Say too little, and the police keep coming back. In the taverns, the talk grows uglier. Men speculate about the killer like he's a ghost story told for amusement. Some even joke about it, ignoring the fact that the women around them live with the risk every night. The press fans the flames. Illustrations of shadowy figures appear on front pages, their knives catching the light, their faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats. It's entertainment for those who read it over breakfast. For Whitechapel, it's a daily reminder that the killer is still out there and still choosing his victims from these streets. It happens again. Another woman is found, this time in a place so close to the main road that the shock is felt instantly. The news spreads faster than the police can cordon the scene. By the time the officers arrive, the crowd is already pressing in, trying to catch a glimpse. Some gasp. Some cross themselves. Others just stare, as though looking might help them understand the mind behind it. The police say little, but the details slip out. The victim had been seen only hours earlier, laughing with a friend, sharing a drink in a tavern. Now she's another name for the papers. For the women of Whitechapel, the message is clear. The killer doesn't need darkness to hide his work. He can strike in the open, under the gaslight, and still vanish into the fog before anyone can stop him. And yet, the streets will not empty. They can't, because in Whitechapel, even with a murderer loose, survival still means going out into the night. The murder's force changes. The women begin working in small groups whenever possible, sticking to busier streets, avoiding alleys unless they know exactly where they lead. They make mental maps of every lamppost, every door left unlocked, every constable's usual route. These routes become lifelines, a way to measure safety in yards and seconds. Some women take to meeting clients in public first, sitting in a tavern or standing in the open until they've read his mood. If something feels wrong, they make an excuse, slip away, and hope he doesn't follow. But these new rules have limits. A client willing to wait for the right moment can still lure a woman away. And with the streets growing emptier, there are fewer witnesses, fewer friendly faces to step in. The fear has made Whitechapel quieter, but it has not made it safer. If anything, the silence only sharpens the sound of footsteps in the fog, September 30th, 1888. Whitechapel will remember it as the double event. It begins in the early hours, when a woman's body is found in a dark yard off Burner Street. The wound is brutal, but strangely, her body shows none of the other marks the Ripper usually leaves. Some think he was interrupted, others believe it was the work of another killer entirely. Before the city can make sense of it, a second body is discovered, this time in Mitre Square, and this time there is no doubt whose work it is. The mutilations are far worse than before. Even the police, hardened by weeks of grim discoveries, are shaken. 2 killings in less than an hour, 2 scenes within walking distance of each other. And still no one saw him clearly enough to name him. The women of Whitechapel hear the news in fragments. Half-whispered accounts from the lodging houses, rumors traded in the taverns. The details are never certain, but the message is, nowhere is safe. Not even the busiest streets, not even with the police nearby. After the double event, something changes in Whitechapel. The fear isn't sharp anymore. It's heavy, settling over the streets like a second layer of fog. The women talk less. The laughter that once cut through the night is gone. Now when two pass each other in the street, it's with a nod, a glance, and eyes that say, "Be careful." The police grow more desperate. They question suspects in public, search rooms without warning, and print wanted posters that show nothing but vague outlines. Every man in Whitechapel could be the killer. And for the women, that means every face is a potential threat. Some begin leaving the East End altogether, trying their luck in other districts. But for most, there's nowhere to go. The same poverty, the same danger, waits just beyond the next street. The Ripper has become more than a man. He's a shadow the city cannot shake. And every time the fog rolls in, you wonder if he's standing just a few steps away, watching. November 9th, 1888. The fog is thicker than usual, swallowing the streets before the lamps can touch them. At the end of a narrow passage off Dorset Street sits Miller's Court, a cramped little square surrounded by decaying brick rooms. It's the kind of place where people mind their own business because they have to. That morning, a landlord's assistant comes to collect rent from a young woman named Mary Jane Kelly. When there's no answer at her door, he leans to the window. What he sees will never leave him. Mary Jane is dead. And her room is a scene so brutal that even the police hesitate before stepping inside. The Ripper's other killings had been quick, done in the open, but here, with 4 walls and a locked door, he had all the time he wanted. The details will spill into the papers, each more lurid than the last. But for the women of Whitechapel, it's not the gore that chills them most. It's the fact that she was killed indoors, in a place she thought was safe. For if the Ripper can reach you there, then there's no such thing as safety. After Miller's Court, the killings stop. No more bodies in the streets, no more bloody headlines, no more footsteps in the fog that lead to horror. At first, the quiet feels unreal, like the city is holding its breath. The women walk with the same caution, still glancing over their shoulders, still avoiding the alleys they know too well. Weeks pass, then months. The Ripper's name fades from the front page, pushed aside by other scandals and crimes. The police never make an arrest. Dozens of suspects are questioned, some even locked up for unrelated offenses, but none can be proven guilty. The killer simply disappears. In Whitechapel, the quiet does not bring relief. It brings questions. Was he dead? Did he leave the city? Or is he still here, just waiting for the fog to rise again? For the women, life returns to the same dangerous rhythm as before. Because the Ripper may be gone, but the streets are still hungry. Even without new murders, the Ripper's ghost lingers in Whitechapel. For the women, his name becomes a warning, told to newcomers. A story passed along not for entertainment, but for survival. Avoid this alley. Don't trust that corner. Never walk alone when the fog is thick. For the city, the murders cement Whitechapel's reputation as a place of danger and vice. Wealthier Londoners speak of the East End with a mix of pity and disgust, rarely setting foot here unless it's to gawk at poverty or write about it for the papers. The police patrols never return to what they were before. Suspicion becomes a permanent part of the streets. Men watching women, women watching men, everyone wondering if the killer's face had once been someone they knew. And yet, life goes on. The taverns reopen, the markets fill again, and the same narrow streets, lit by the same sputtering gas lamps, wait for the next shadow to claim them. The Ripper killings didn't just scar Whitechapel. They rewrote London's story. Before 1888, the East End was already a place the upper classes avoided, but now it became a permanent fixture in the city's imagination. A landscape of gaslit alleys, whispered threats, and women walking alone into danger. The press discovered the power of fear. Crime reporting became more sensational, more invasive. They learned that readers craved every grisly detail, and they fed that hunger with drawings, maps, and lurid descriptions that made the killer seem larger than life. For the women, the legacy was harsher. The Ripper didn't just take lives. He left behind a shadow of suspicion and stigma. Society talked more about their profession than their humanity, reducing them to symbols in a story about evil, rather than victims of it. And the idea of the mysterious killer would echo far beyond Whitechapel, feeding novels, plays, and eventually the films that would turn Jack the Ripper into a character as much as a criminal. In the years after the murders, fear stopped being just a feeling in Whitechapel. It became a tool. The politicians used the Ripper as proof that the East End needed more control, more policing, more oversight from people who had never walked its streets at night. The police used his shadow to justify greater authority, bigger budgets, and a more watchful eye on the poor. In practice, it meant more raids on lodging houses, more arrests for petty crimes, and more women forced off the streets without anywhere else to go. The press kept his name alive, because every anniversary, every new lead, meant another headline to sell. And so even when the real man was long gone, Jack the Ripper kept working. As an idea, as a ghost that still frightened people into obedience. Though for the women, it was a constant reminder that their lives could be used to serve someone else's story, and that the world would always pay more attention to the killer than to the killed. Time changes cities, but in Whitechapel, some streets seem to resist forgetting. The buildings lean a little more, their bricks darkened with decades of soot. The cobblestones are worn smooth, but they're the same stones that once echoed with the footsteps of women walking into the fog. Hanbury Street, Burner Street, Mitre Square. The names live on, though the people have long vanished. For locals, they're just part of the map. For visitors, they're something closer to a pilgrimage, a chance to stand where history turned to horror. Some corners feel unchanged. The narrowness, the way the light doesn't quite reach the ground, the quiet that settles when you step away from the main road. It's easy to imagine how a shadow could have waited there for hours and never been seen. The city grows around them, but the streets remain. A reminder that no matter how much London changes, some parts of its history are built too deep to dig out. For most of the world, the Ripper's victims are just names on a list, but in Whitechapel they were neighbors, friends, and women who fought to survive one day at a time. Though Marianne Nichols had once been married, once had a home, but poverty and drink pushed her into the lodging houses. Annie Chapman sold flowers and matches when she could, doing whatever work would pay for a bed. Elizabeth Stride was known for her Swedish accent and her habit of humming songs under her breath. Catherine Eddowes loved to sing, even when the streets were cold and empty. Mary Jane Kelly was the youngest, and the only one killed indoors. She spoke of wanting to leave the streets behind, but like so many, she was trapped between survival and escape. They weren't just prostitutes. They were daughters, wives, mothers, and women who laughed, argued, and dreamed. But the world remembers them mostly for how they died, and almost never for how they lived. In Victorian London, poverty wasn't just hard. It was a trap. If you were a working-class woman, your life depended on the men around you, a husband's wages, a father's roof. When those were gone, through death, abandonment, or abuse, you had almost no safety net. Work for women was scarce, and it paid just enough to starve slowly. Laundry work ruined your hands. Factory work broke your body. Domestic service meant living under someone else's rules, often for pennies. For many, sex work wasn't a choice. It was the only way to keep a bed in a lodging house, the only way to afford a meal, the only way to avoid sleeping in the street. And the street was a predator in itself. If hunger didn't get you, cold would. If cold didn't, the disease or violence might. That was the choice for thousands of women in the East End. Risk the dangers of the street at night, or face the dangers of the street with nothing at all. Victorian London liked to see itself as moral, clean, and civilized. But when it came to the East End, the city turned its head. The wealthy read about Whitechapel in the newspapers the way someone might read about a far-off country, with curiosity, but no urgency to change it. The government spoke of reform, but their efforts were slow, underfunded, and often aimed more at controlling the poor than helping them. The churches offered charity, but it usually came with conditions. Leave your work, follow their rules, and abandon the people you knew. For women who relied on each other to survive, it was another kind of isolation. Even the police, tasked with protecting the streets, were more interested in enforcing laws against the women themselves than in protecting them from danger. So the cycle went on. Poverty feeding desperation, desperation feeding danger, and danger feeding the stories that made the rest of London feel both shocked and superior. More than a century later, people are still asking the same question. Who was Jack the Ripper? The suspects number in the dozens. Butchers, doctors, sailors, and men from every corner of London society. Some were locals, some were foreigners. A few were never even in Whitechapel, but were accused by rumor alone. The theories range from the plausible to the absurd. A royal family conspiracy, a mad doctor seeking revenge. Even artists and writers have been named, their dark imaginations mistaken for dark deeds. Yet for all the investigation, there is no proof, only speculation, handwriting comparisons, and aging police notes that offer more shadows than answers. And maybe that's the real reason the mystery lasts. The killer vanished, but the fear stayed. A name without a face is harder to forget than one that's been caught and hanged. As the years passed, Jack the Ripper stopped being just a killer. He became a character. Writers turned him into a phantom, a shadow with a knife who could slip through any door. Stage plays and novels gave him style and cunning, attributes the real man may never have had. Later films would give him a face, sometimes charming, sometimes monstrous, always designed to thrill. But in building the legend, the world lost the truth. The victims became props, their lives reduced to brief introductions before their scripted deaths. The grit, the poverty, the real streets of Whitechapel. These were replaced with set pieces, gaslight romance, and fog machines. It made the Ripper easier to watch, and easier to forget that he was a real man who preyed on real women. The myth will likely outlive the facts, and perhaps that's the cruelest part. The killer gets remembered, while the women he murdered fade further into the background with every retelling. The Whitechapel of today is not the Whitechapel of 1888, but its history still breathes in the bricks. The narrow lanes are wider now. Electric lights chase away the dark corners. The old lodging houses are gone, replaced by shops, flats, and restaurants. Yet if you know where to look, the traces remain. A doorway here, an alley there, places where the past still clings like soot. Jack the Ripper tours draw crowds from around the world. Tourists walk the same streets the women once worked, listening to guides tell stories that blur fact and fiction. Some come for the history, others for the thrill of standing in a killer's shadow. For locals, it's a complicated legacy. The murders brought the East End a kind of fame, but it's a fame rooted in blood, and one that often forgets the lives lost in favor of the man who took them. Whitechapel has moved on, but it has never been able to let go. The world likes to think that the dangers of Whitechapel in 1888 are a thing of the past, but for many women, the streets can still be just as deadly. But modern cities still have their shadows, places where poverty, neglect, and violence work together to make people disappear. The names change, the dangers don't. Today's killers may not hide behind gaslight and fog, but they still find victims among the vulnerable. Runaways, those struggling with addiction, those society has already chosen to ignore. And just like in Victorian London, their stories rarely make the front page until the body count rises high enough to force attention. Whitechapel's past is a warning, not just about one man, but about how easily the world can overlook the lives of those it values least. For over a century, the story of Jack the Ripper has been told in his voice. The voice of violence, fear, and mystery. It's time to tell it in theirs. Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Their names deserve more than a place in a police ledger. They laughed, they sang, they fought, they endured. They made choices every day to survive in a world that left them few options. By remembering them as more than victims, we rob the killer of his power. We remind the world that they were not faceless shadows in the fog, but human beings with dreams, flaws, and dignity, whose lives mattered more than the man who ended them. And maybe that's the truest justice Whitechapel will ever see. In recent years, historians and activists have begun to push back against the way the Ripper murders are told. Some tours now focus less on the gore and more on the lives of the women, telling visitors about their families, their work, and the struggles they faced in Victorian London. Documentaries and books have begun digging into public records. Lodging house registers, marriage certificates, police notes, to give a fuller picture of each woman's life before her final night. Even in Whitechapel itself, there's a quiet movement to shift the focus away from the killer. Memorial plaques have been placed at certain sites. Community events speak their names without mentioning his. It's not about erasing history. It's about taking it back, making sure the women are remembered for more than the way they died. Because when we tell the story differently, We change what the world learns from it. No matter how many times the story is retold, Jack the Ripper refuses to fade from the public imagination. Every few years, a new breakthrough is announced. A letter examined, a suspect's descendant interviewed, a piece of evidence tested with modern science, and every time, the mystery slips away again, just out of reach. The Ripper has become more than a man. He's a symbol of evil hiding in plain sight, of cities that swallow their poor, of how violence against women can be both sensationalized and ignored. Films, books, television, they all return to the gaslit streets, the curl of fog, the glint of a knife, because the world is still drawn to the danger, even when the truth is uglier than the fiction. And maybe that's why his shadow lingers, because we keep walking back into it. Picture it again. Whitechapel, 1888. The air is damp, and the fog rolls low, swallowing the cobblestones until your feet vanish into it. Gas lamps glow weakly, their light too thin to push the darkness far. You hear the clop of a cart somewhere ahead, the shuffle of boots behind you. The sound makes you glance back, but it's only a stranger, his face unreadable in the haze. Every step takes you past the same narrow doors, the same pubs spilling warm yellow light into the cold street. Laughter drifts out. But you keep walking. You can't afford to stop. Somewhere in the distance, a woman's voice sings a tune you almost recognize. It fades before you can place it, swallowed by the quiet. This is how it felt to live here. To move through nights that were both alive with sound and empty enough to hear your own heartbeat. Nights where survival wasn't guaranteed, and the fog seemed to hide more than just the weather. Our walk ends here, at the edge of the old East End, where the streets open out and the fog begins to thin. We leave Whitechapel behind, but its lessons follow. It's not just the story of a killer, but of the world that allowed him to hunt. A world that ignored the poor, judged the desperate, and forgot the dead in favor of the man who made them so. The Ripper may be gone, the gaslights replaced, the cobblestones smoothed by time. But the dangers the women faced, poverty, violence, and the cold indifference of society, are not relics of history. If their story survives, let it be as a warning that no one's life should be worth less because of where they live, how much they have, or the work they do to survive. This was Whitechapel, this was 1888, and this was why you would not have survived.